Trig pre-college math, discriminants. The roots of the equation x squared minus 10x plus 25 equals 0 are what? A, imaginary, B, real and irrational, C, real, rational, and equal, and D, real, rational, and unequal. Just a quick little background on how this stuff all works. That we know the quadratic formula, the x equals, hold on, I'm getting ahead of myself here. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared, and then negative 4 times a times c all over double a. Well, this piece in here under the radical, that's what we call the discriminant. That. So, because that really depends on what our roots are going to come out to be. And when we ask discriminant questions, like the roots of the equation are what, we're not saying what, we don't want the number of the roots, like not like 7 and negative 4. Like we want to know about them. And there's 3 questions. Are they real or are they imaginary? Are they rational or are they irrational? And then are they equal or are they unequal? And so these are the 3 questions that were asked when we're asked to describe the roots. Real versus imaginary. Real versus imaginary is pretty simple because it's in a square root here, that if it's positive, it's real. Even if it's 0, it's real. So if it's greater than or equal to 0, it's real. Like if it's 5, 7, 13, doesn't matter if it's a square or not. If it's a positive number or 0, we consider it to be real. If it's a negative number, then it's going to be imaginary. And we're very familiar with that. That's where we get the I stuff from, like the square root of negative 5. That's going to be something with an I, right? So if your discriminant is negative, it's imaginary. Once you're imaginary, you're done. That's why choice A is imaginary. That's it. But if it's real, then you have to answer these other questions. Rational versus irrational. Rational versus irrational depends on whether or not it's a square or basically if it's not. So if you see it's 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, the square numbers, the square root of that gives us a rational number. It's the square root of the square is rational. But if it's not, like 5, 7, 13, 22, those are considered irrational. Now again, just like how we're saying 0 works for real, even though it's not really positive, same thing for rational. The square root of 0, 0 is not a square number. Well, 0 is kind of the odd number in the whole bunch because the square root of 0 still is 0, and I guess 0 squared would be 0, but we don't really consider it a square, but it does fit into the rational category here. So this is squares, including 0, so on. And then if it's rational, now once it's irrational, you're done there. Just like once it's imaginary, you're done. Once it's irrational, like it's not a positive square, like it's 5 or 7 or 3, then you're done. Because if it's irrational, it's automatically unequal. But if it's rational, then you need to answer the next question. Is it equal or is it unequal? And the only time it's ever equal is when it's 0. When your discriminant is 0, it's real, it's rational, but it's also equal. And that's because the plus or minus in front of it, that you're going to have plus or minus 0. And plus 0 and minus 0 is the same thing. It doesn't matter if you add or subtract 0, it doesn't change. So we consider that to be 2 equal roots. If it's any number other than 0, like if it's 4, 5, 6, 12, whatever, 2 add 7, plussing it and minusing it will give you 2 separate things. So if it's 0, then it's equal. If it's anything other than 0, it's unequal. And so these are questions. So again, real quick, positive real, negative imaginary. Square rational, not irrational. 0 equal, anything but 0, unequal. So let's take a look at this one. And so we don't need to do the whole quadratic formula here. We could just do the b squared and then the negative 4ac part of it to answer these questions. And so this, the b squared would be, here's your b. A is 1, c is 25. So b squared is 100. Remember, even though it's negative, squares to positive. And then negative 4 times 1 times 25, well, that is 100. Negative 4 times 1 times 25 is negative 100. 100 minus 100 is 0. So, it's real, it's rational, and most of all, it's equal. And that's the key. Whenever you see this equal, it's all about having a zero answer here. All right, let's do another. Number 2. 9x squared plus 3x minus 4 equals 0. Remember, again, it has to be set equal to 0, and you probably will come across problems that aren't, so you may have to rearrange it before you go forwards. But it has to be set equal to 0. And so b squared, negative 4ac, that's going to be 9 because of b squared, not because a is 9. And negative 4 times a is 9 times c is negative 4. And so we have 9, and then you need to evaluate these. Negative 4 times 9 times negative 4. Well, let's see, and I could have my calculator make this easier for me, but let's try to do it without. Negative 4 times 9, that's going to be negative 36. And 4 times 36, let's see, 4 times 30 is 120, and 4 times 6 is 24. That's going to be plus 144. Now, we noticed this when we were doing the quadratic formula, that this number is always negative. If one of these is also negative, like in this case, we end up with 2 negatives, and a negative times a negative is positive. So this is the case where you're going to end up as a plus some number. If this number were positive 4, then we'd end up with a negative because we'd only have 1 out of the 3 negative. But if 2 out of these 3 numbers is negative, it's going to turn into a plus. And that's, in this case, we have 2 negatives here. If all 3 are negative, it's going to end up being negative. So it's got to be an even amount of negatives, and when you only have 3 numbers, the only way that happens is if it's 2 out of 3. So this is the case that happens. So 9 plus 144 is 153, and that's our discriminant. And so because it is positive, you don't need to put that plus sign there, but I didn't want to erase all that. Because it's positive, that means that it's real. So that gets rid of that. Is 153 a square? No, it is not. So that gets rid of our rational options, and it has to then be D, irrational. One more quick one. Number 3. Let's see. B squared would be 9, and we have a negative 4 times 2 times 2. 9, and this would be minus 16. 9 minus 16 is negative 7. Because it's negative, automatically, I know it's imaginary. Okay? See you tomorrow.